Welcome to the ROI Masterclass, the podcast where vision meets strategy and bold moves create measurable results. I'm Liat Siegel, interior designer and ROI strategist with 17 years of experience. I help businesses transform properties and ideas into high-performing assets. This show is specifically for real estate investors, hospitality operators, and boutique developers who aren't afraid to take risks, challenge the status quo, and demand a return on every decision they make. Each and every week, we talk with innovators and leaders across industries about the strategies and the insights and really all the unconventional thinking that turns potential into profit every single time. If you believe that smart design, decisive leadership, and strategic risk are the keys to real ROI, you're in the exact right place. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Adam, a leader at PadSplit, a fast-growing platform rethinking how we use residential real estate to solve affordability while increasing investor returns. PadSplit is often compared to Airbnb, but with a completely different mission. Instead of short-term stays, they're creating long-term, affordable co-living by converting underutilized space into income-generating rooms. With over 30,000 units already on the platform and a bold vision to scale to over 1 million, Adam is at the forefront of a new asset class, one that sits at the intersection of housing innovation, marketplace economics, and real estate investing. Today, we're diving into how this model works, where investors get it wrong, and how design and data can unlock serious ROI in this emerging space. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here because you're entirely creating a new category, very much like we are. And I'm sure it can sometimes feel lonely or scary, maybe in the beginning. Tell us how you got started, and because this is so inventive and I can really see this competing neck to neck with Airbnb.
Well, thank you so much for having me. No, it is still scary. I'm still figuring it out, but it's been a wild journey and ride. I did not found the company, but I will talk about like my journey within this. I started early on, 2016. My, business partner and I, we were getting into real estate and we purchased this quadplex in the old Fourth Ward area of Atlanta. And for whatever reason, we just wanted to be the cheapest option. And I think there was some deeper meaning to it, but I think ultimately we were just like, okay, we want to make sure we have high occupancy. And so we had these 1-1s and we had 4 of them. And we're like, okay, well, what if we convert these into 3-1s? And we rent out each of these bedrooms individually. And so we worked on that project. I'd still say we don't really know what we're doing, but especially then we did not. And we converted these 1-1s into 3-1s. Then we rented these rooms out on Facebook Marketplace at the time. This was over 10 years ago. And these rooms filled up in like a week. And we rented them out for $800 a room. And, I remember getting this first kind of payment or check. And I'll be honest, I felt kind of weird about it. I felt like, oh my gosh, this is $2,400. In the market at that time, a 1-1 was $1,200. And, so I'm making double what I could have in the market. But then the aha for me is these tenants came up to me and they said, hey, Adam, why is this so cheap? They said, I can live in this area. I can walk anywhere. I have Wi-Fi. I have utilities. Like, why is this so cheap? And that was my aha of like, wow, I feel like I'm making a lot of money and felt a little bad about that. Meanwhile, people are coming to me saying, hey, why is this so cheap? Because, if I look at that $1,200 unit, it was $800 to rent. That's a meaningful difference to stay in this particular area of Atlanta. And so that was my aha moment, convinced Atticus over a couple year period to hire me to come lead growth. But ultimately it was that aha moment. And then what we were building here as a marketplace that I said, oh, wow, like I saw this experience and maybe akin to Airbnb way back in the day is I think once you have that experience, just like, how can I scale this 1 million times over? And to me, like a marketplace, a technology model that was able to scale, that was the solution. And so, PadSplit is a 2-sided marketplace similar to Airbnb, focused on the challenges of shared housing. I wouldn't say like co-living is in our mission per se. It's really around like, how do you solve housing demand and access for the workforce? And co-living is a solution to like drive really, really deep affordability. And so we focus on a couple things. One is like, how do I drive demand? How do I focus on screening with low-income earners? How do I collect from low-income earners? And then how do I like manage the perceived chaos that is co-living? And we've built a product that we can scale agnostic of market, agnostic of asset class, really, but to solve these co-living tenants and these challenges. So we've now scaled to over 30,000 units. I think we're at 33,000 units. We're in most of the major metros, and we'll be ticking off the last kind of couple of major metros, which are San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and the Bay Area this year. So just really excited to be truly geographically kind of centered where this is a true issue.
Wow, it sounds like it's really beginning to integrate, much like Airbnb was in the beginning and starting to make its mark. Tell us more about the software itself and how it solves for all the issues that you discussed initially. I believe those are things that, traditionally, if somebody was going to go do this by themselves, they wouldn't be able to solve. And with your software, they could. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like my learnings from this are truly like learned and lived, where, I think I spent way too much time trying to manage this early co-living property that I set up versus thinking about like how to really scale. And so I'd say that to any investor of like, do you want to be an investor or do you just want to like be an operator in this one small property? And I mean, there's different tastes for everybody. But to me, what PadSplit does really well is it enables you to actually scale this asset class. The things that really bog you down in time, I was going through my time where I'd post on Facebook and Craigslist, and then I'd get 300 people message me saying, I want to rent this room. Maybe 10 are interested. Then I schedule a tour and, 2 show up and none of them are interested. And it takes me like this process that I manually have to spend all this time doing. PadSplit now, we're listing on every single third-party provider. So think Zillow, Apartments.com, Furnish Finder, Roomies, like anywhere you would list for a room, we're already listing. And then for the last 6 years, we've invested heavily in paid search, paid marketing to just like own this group of demand. So anyone that's looking for a room is coming through the PadSplit model. And so our goal is just really, really own that demand. Screening, there's so much bias around just screening in general, but especially screening for low income earners. But we've had 70,000 people live or like come through PadSplit. So we've been able to look at different data sets and really triangulate, well, what really leads to a good outcome to effectively like underwrite the workforce and low income earners than I think the bias in the market traditionally does, which creates a huge access issue. And so I do think that we're not perfect, but we're investing so deeply in that we're seeing really, really good results that you do not have outside of PadSplit. And then for the collections, we don't often talk about it, but we do like week to week payments. And I think it goes back to like, who are you designing for? People get paid weekly or bi-weekly. People think about money in that. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck in this instance, it's like, why not align a payment system that is like top of mind for that particular population? And then we additionally have, we can see who's behind or who's not. You can build financial products to help people through particularly hard times or loss of a job to either find a job or short-term financing or different things that, you're not going to traditionally find in the market. And then the last piece, which is I think the biggest one, which is we've had 70,000 people live through PadSplit. We've seen every single issue. And you as a co-living operator, shared housing operator doing this on your own, you're like figuring all that out. You're maybe in different forums learning. We've had 70,000 people live with us and we've constantly are updating our playbooks and constantly thinking about how to make this better. And then we're building a product across all of those things where it's all integrated. So I'm not using these piecemeal systems to go scale. And I think that's what's really, really, really enabled us to, one, just have really good focus on the tenants of shared housing and what makes that difficult to scale. And then I think we'll get into this throughout the convo, but then like letting the local operators really just go drive like their taste of the business, which has evolved over time.
I would love to hear more about that because from what I understand from you, there are multiple different ways, creative ways to make this happen. I would love to hear, before we get into that, what kind of information, what kind of data is coming out from having 70,000 people, go through PadSplit and live at these properties? Is there any one pattern that kind of emerges? I do really, really love that you're building products within your company to help people through difficult times, because there is a huge affordability housing issue in the country where, people are making more than they've ever made, but still can't, make it day to day. And when I had Denny on the show, we were talking through this. It's also a place of, I'm sure, shame or anxiety for people who feel like they should be having a better quality of life and it feels out of reach. So I feel that you are solving that through PadSplit in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is, gives them back their dignity. Really?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, like, I don't pretend to know anybody. And so what I try to really focus in on is like, all I want people to have is I just wanted to give them or give an opportunity for investors to create affordable housing. And what people decide to do with that is really up to them in my mind. But to me, I'm just trying to create the cheapest, best quality form of housing that can go scale. And so, going back to your data point and what's the most like, I still think it goes back to that access and underwriting, where in fact, low income income earners, we have a lower eviction rate than like, class B, C, even A in some categories because, we've aligned on, certain criteria for income that is lower than I think what you would traditionally assume, like 650 credit score, 3x income, first and last month deposits. Like what that really excludes is anyone that makes under $45,000 a year, which is a lot of people. And so like, just even that data point, it's like, okay, well, what's clearly making $45,000 a year, you should be able to like live and operate in your market, and you are a consistent earner. It's just not enough to afford a studio in your apartment. And so I think like the aha for me, and even going through all these data sets, is building much more confidence around, a 2x or even 1.8x income view, to using different identity kind of views of how to like underwrite and see the best outcomes for individuals and like build that type of housing. And so I think that's like the big movement, if I'm honest with you, of like everyone is always going to use these kind of biased views of, well, if you make more, you have less bad outcomes. And we have a 1% evictions rate with people that make on average $25,000 a year. I think that just goes to like the model more than the person. And so to me, like, yeah, whether it's dignity back or whatever it is, like to me, I just want to provide like stable, cheap housing that can scale. And shocker, this is an effective way to do it. And low income earners are good payers, low evictions, great people. You know what I mean? That's like, I think a bias that is carried through within like your traditional, landlord categories.
So would you say that's a misconception that we're breaking right here? Like this will in itself be a short. We're going to clip this and put it everywhere, that this is a misconception.
Yeah. I mean, it is. And I think, like, again, my goal is to prove that over millions of units and millions of data points. And I only have 70,000 versus the traditional market having millions. And so I think they'll always point to those things. But we wouldn't have scaled to where we are if people were having bad outcomes, right? And so to me, we're scaling kind of doubling every year. And we wouldn't be able to do that, especially at these kind of numbers, if people weren't getting those results. So there's always anecdotes. But if I look at the macro sense, yeah, it is the biggest kind of misconception when it comes to like screening.
Is there one thing in particular that comes out with the screening or a few data points that you could say this person is going to be a better fit than somebody else?
I am not as close to like the data. I think like the themes I'd talk about are more, consistent income, even if it's lower. Are you who you say you are? And so as you scan the web, as you think through identity, like, is there instances of people pretending to be somebody else? Evictions, candidly, like one eviction doesn't necessarily correlate to like bad outcomes, which I think is an uncommon view. If where you had an eviction, people always go down that path. The more people I've interviewed that have had an eviction, they do not want to go through that again, right? And so it's like maybe opposite of what people would think. But those data points in particular are loud.
What about the safety component of people, strangers living together? And how do you match people? Or is there a time and place where people just don't work well together and you have to relocate? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think like people are people. I think the more we've tried to match, and maybe this is my own bias coming through and I would need to see more of the data, the more I tried to match personally, I'll speak to in that end, the worse outcomes I got, where like I wanted people to find their own people, if that makes sense. And so I think with PadSplit in particular, you are a member of this marketplace and you can transfer to different PadSplit properties to find that. That's not always the best for the landlords. We're trying to figure out like what's the right kind of taste there. But I think hosts do a good job of this too, because they're a part of the screening process. They're saying, yes, I want this person to move in. And they can look at the makeup of that house. You interview the person moving in, you get certain criteria of this person moving in. You're making these assumptions of whether this person will be good or bad. I have not personally like had a lot of good success with that, where within PadSplit, you see who you're going to be living with. There's certain characteristics. People making their own decision, I have found to have better outcomes. But I'm sure there's a lot of hosts that are deeper into it than I am and are finding that match. When it comes to safety, it just does not happen as much as people think. And I think it goes back to like, are you setting up established rules? The good and the bad around shared housing is there's so many people at the property, or not so many, right? But there's like, more than one tenant. And so there are more eyes. And so because of that, issues get escalated quickly. Therefore, they get like solved quickly. And I think it's about figuring out the right endpoints for everybody, whether someone's in an argument or there's an altercation or whatever it is. There's like a playbook that we have to help like mitigate those. And so they do happen, but just like not at the volume you'd think. Like the vast majority of people, shocker, are just trying to like live life and not trying to get into these particular situations. There will always be things that come up. But again, we've seen so many of them. It's more around like building the product around ratings, around communication, around setting good rules, and your host like being a part of that as well. That leads to really good outcomes.
It sounds like what you're saying is like the majority of people at lower thresholds of income and just in general, everybody just wants to live in peace and have a place to rest their head and a good, like a
Yep.
roof over their heads. And there's some bad apples or whatever, but you have built the systems to be able to mitigate as much of that as possible. And why, create a scenario or not have a solution for a whole market, a huge market of people that can greatly benefit when there's just a few, bad apples or.
Well said. I think people focus on, like, in our case, maybe the 0.5% versus like the 99.5%.
I love it. And so you've created a market for those people who haven't had a voice until now.
I'd like to think so, but yeah.
So tell us creatively, how do your hosts set up different properties and different viewpoints?
Yeah. And so, like, again, I'll start with my process 10 years ago. Like, I was just trying to take underutilized space to create the cheapest, like, along with quality, cheapest like unit possible. And so to do that, you convert all the space. You convert your living room, your dining room. I convert as much space as I can to like drop the price per room. And in the aggregate, you as a landlord make money. I don't know if I said that at the beginning, but ultimately, like, you take a 3-2, I look at my family room, my dining room, I convert those rooms into additional rental spaces. In the aggregate, you make 2 to 3x more than you would long term. So think it's a midterm model with short-term rental like revenue. It's very similar to Airbnb from a revenue standpoint. I think we're slightly higher, but we just have a lot less turns. Your long-term renters, mid to long-term renters, that's our model. But it started off with just, how do you basically create the most units and the most affordable units you can in a single family property? What has evolved over the years, and I think this has been the beauty and maybe the curse too of like developing this marketplace, is people start to leverage it differently. I think it was 2 years into PadSplit. There's a host by the name of Dave Edwards in Houston. He has a property management company now. He is scaling PadSplit. He's an incredible operator. But he started to think about, well, hey, there's enough people coming to this PadSplit marketplace. People are looking for different things. And people are willing to pay more for different types of, I don't want to say quality, it's because it's not the right word. It's not like we have not good quality. Maybe it's like a step up. But he developed 3 different tiers of PadSplit. So he had his kind of basic tier, and then his step up version had like nicer finishes, or then his other version had like a workstation and like a flat screen TV on the wall, different like lock systems, like all of these things. He started developing different tiers and then commanded different like room rates for that. So in this case, I think this was early on in Houston, but you'd be renting for like 170 a week, which is in the mid 700s per month for rent. I have this kind of basic model. And as I move up, I might be closer to like $900 a room. And as he was doing this, I kept thinking like, gosh, that's not going to work. But then people booked, and then people stayed, and then people had really good reviews and responses to these different types of product. And to me, I always go back to like, does the price reflect the product? And that's all I really want to continue to drive as like the marketplace, while obviously having like safety and specific like quality standards as like the minimum. So that's one example. I think there's another example in Phoenix. Brian and Gina Kandeski, they started doing a turnkey model actually, where they're buying and building PadSplits and then selling them to different investors, where it is like, I wouldn't say like, I'll say like a luxury PadSplit. Like they're just super nice finishes. They all have their own individual bathrooms. They're truly redesigning this entire property to be based off of the data where share or private bathrooms book faster. They are also 30% higher in gross from a pricing perspective. And so like you can do the math and start to figure out, okay, well, bathrooms are the most expensive thing to add to a property. Maybe I have a property that has 4 beds or 4 bathrooms and 6 bedrooms. And then I can maybe just add 2 more bathrooms to do like a 6-6. And then therefore I can command higher room rates or whatever the case may be. But they were basically building like these 6 en-suites with this beautiful living room, beautiful kitchen. Some of their properties have like pools and ping pong tables. And we originally had policies and workstations. And we originally had policies saying like cement in the pool. Don't like take on that liability. Don't think like all these other type of insurance things just to like promote specific types of housing. And I think we've really kind of got out of that. And these other groups are really thinking about from the user perspective and then using our data from a pricing perspective, what constitutes the best results and therefore building that. And that has been the beauty of our marketplace. And my goal is to really just kind of continue to aggregate all this data and start to give it to people. And what we have found is the local operator and making those decisions have had way better results than Adam dictating what he believes from his experience in Atlanta. So I can go on that for a long time, but I'll kind of leave it at that piece where, people are really thinking about the functionality and design of these PadSplits now and commanding different rates. And yeah, I didn't know where it would go, but people are getting really, really good results, not just operationally, but yield as well.
It's
Yep.
not shocking that, it's
It
what I
was to
yell
me,
about.
it was to me early on because I just like didn't know who was coming and booking rooms, right?
Yeah.
But no, it's definitely changed my view on it 1,000%.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I yell about all day with my megaphone. I'm like, you have to take into consideration the people that are using the space.
Yeah, yeah.
They will dictate, what they're willing to spend more for. They will tell you. The
Yeah.
reviews will tell you.
1,000%. And I think like, again, like now we've kind of shifted where we're focused more on like, hey, what are the safety standards? What are the minimum quality standards? And then we're starting to build in different features or amenities to then change pricing based off of like what we're learning people are putting in. Whether that is like one of my properties has their own individual sink and own individual fridge in each room because it was this old Victorian house, right? And like, that's great. And that commands like a different type of pricing and you can design and think through that differently. But we're starting to pull those things into the product, probably not fast enough, but based off of those amenities, one, you can market those, but two, you can kind of change pricing based off of those as well.
Amazing, amazing. And I love what you mentioned about the first person. What was his name?
Dave Edwards.
That he created a standardization. I think each
Yep.
of these hosts is doing that in their own unique way, but creating standardization within the process and saying, okay, this is how we can uniquely both drive value for the people using the spaces, but also drive more revenue. And that's what we're all about on the show. Is it's not just about the money. It's not just about the financial ROI. It's about also the people ROI. Are we doing things to make people's lives better in the spaces that they live, that they work, that they play? And also ultimately, like I believe that when you invest in people, they will invest back into you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I promote within my team and like company wise in general is just like this kind of member first attitude, not because we don't care about like hosts or landlords, but it's like if you solve and you get the feedback from data from like the population that is like truly paying the bill here,
right?
And then like provide that data to hosts, like members have a good experience, hosts have a good experience, and like it unravels from there. But you got to focus in on like who's your main customer.
Why is this, especially given where the market is at right now, why is this a huge opportunity that investors should get in on right now?
So one, and probably the biggest one is through this model, you create more yield. Therefore, you can invest in the current interest rate market. I think like 5 years ago when interest rates were really low, you kind of had these different options and you cared less about yield. Money was so cheap. It's not so cheap anymore. So then like what constitutes an additional step up in yield? PadSplit will do that so you can continue to invest in the market. So I think that's number one. Number two is, now I can kind of rattle this off for different markets, but I'll, if there's one market in particular, I can go into there. But for Atlanta in particular, there's 12,000 people a month that are typing in, I need a room for rent. And, median rent in Atlanta is like $1,700 for a studio. And you start to do the math. And so you got to make $50,000. And so like our market is really anyone that makes you have to make $50,000 to constitute being able to afford the studio at that rate. And so our population is really anyone that makes under $50,000 a year. That population is like growing. There are more people searching for rooms, and we're building a marketplace to like capture all that demand and allow you as this investor to like list properties to access that demand. And I could cascade that across every market throughout the US. There's somewhere around 1.8 or 1.9 million kind of shared housing units we believe we can support. There's about 1 million monthly searches of I need a room for rent, right? And so there's certain like data points that are signaling that people are interested in this product. And you've started to see it, right? Like Zillow, apartments.com, all this focus on those two in particular have added like room rental sections where now I can like, hey,
Wow.
This is the room. Or even Facebook Marketplace has added, hey, is this a shared house, right? And so like there are signals that this is moving, and it's moving because there has not been like particular wage growth within this population. There are still a lot of low income earners. People have built supply not for this group. And this group, I won't comment on the larger macroeconomic situation because I'm not an economist, nor do I fully understand it. But like it is putting more pressure on the population, spreading dollars further. And so it's naturally, people are starting to develop more workforce housing, or people are trying to figure out a way to like build for this population. But what I think people forget is you got to like market to that group. And that's what we've done really, really well. And so that's what I'd say is like the time is now. The time is going to be for a while until we build substantial housing, or candidly until like population growth declines, where you can leverage the existing housing stock to make that gap. But we're hundreds of thousands of units short in every single market.
Yeah.
And so I just just don't think this is going to be a trend that's going to go away in the next 5 years. This is decades, if not 100 years away from being solved. And so I just, is the time now? You can continue investing with this model by housing people long-term in your community and make enough money to support current debt service. And there's just so many more people that are falling into this category. Like, I'll just posit those two. You know what I mean? I don't think you need a third or a fourth. I'm happy to provide. But in my mind, like, that's why you should take action now if you're an investor looking to continue to expand your portfolio.
Absolutely. I think there's other categories too where people just, even if they're making more, you were saying the luxury housing, like that they just want to live in a shared unit for whatever the reason is.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like there are so many different reasons why people would want to choose this type of housing. And what we have found is the more we have of it, like, our occupancy rates are still trending in a really good direction. So that hasn't slowed down, right? If anything, we hear more and more about the affordable housing crisis and how there's no place to live. And it's not like that as conversations have changed. And it's not as if anything policy-wise, builder-wise has signaled that we're building more housing to support that, or that we're changing policies to really allow for more building. In my opinion, it's only going to get more challenging.
Do you know if funds or grants, like, I know that there's a lot available throughout the country for affordable housing. Do you know if that can get tied into what you're doing? Because that could also building these out much more enticing to investors.
I can't comment on a particular funding mechanism. I don't know if there's some there's none set up for PadSplit in particular is what I'd say. I think we're constantly trying to think through and work on that. I think the broader market and the conscious capitalistic market that we've kind of operated in, you can make money doing this. We have financial product that people have built around our ecosystem, so you can get different debt service. And so we haven't really gone the grant route. What I have found is people locally know that world better than we ever will. And so if you know that world, and you're building this type of housing, I can't see a reason you wouldn't have access to that. I don't have a lot of data points there, or people building particular funding vehicles outside of your traditional DSCR and kind of financing gap financial products around PadSplit.
Okay. I was just talking to Thomas Hagos. We just had him on the podcast recently, and he's a developer in the affordable housing world. And he was telling me about a program called NYLA, I believe, in New York, or maybe it's, somewhere else also.
To me, I love those programs. They should exist. They're just super per dollar, right? We have over 10,000 units in PadSplit in Atlanta. We have taken zero subsidy and have used the market to scale this. Meanwhile, Atlanta has spent over $1 billion and created less housing than that. And so to me, it's also, I struggle with it because it's if we really want to invest, it doesn't seem like the fastest and most effective way to scale housing. So I always come back to our model as in, attempting to, and in some cases, achieving it faster than that. But those mechanisms should exist. I'm not discounting them. People should take advantage of them to go build this type of housing. We've just proven that you don't need that to scale.
Amazing. So cut out the bureaucracy when you can.
I am pro those funding mechanisms. I just find to spend that much money to create 500 units is got to look at it at some point.
So there's an ROI component where how much more you can scale, right? If you're going another route.
That's my point. If someone is listening to this, they're putting a couple $100,000 towards this particular project, or even $1 million, that's going to create 100 units. With $1 million, you can go create, what is this? 30 some rooms here. That's just that money. And on top, you create a lot more units is all I'm saying.
Wow. Amazing. So what would you say they're doing wrong, or, opportunity that they're missing out on, their biggest mistakes?
I think people's biggest mistakes are, I think, your classic real estate ones where I purchase the wrong asset and then I have to spend too much. And maybe this gets to the whole design component where a lot of these hosts that have done this, and to Dave Edwards' point, these tiered systems, they can look at an asset and they can figure out the right mix. I think newer investors overbuy and then they have too many renovations. Therefore, they have to have a really, really high price per room to make the deal work. And it puts them in underwater and a real big challenge. I wouldn't say underwater, maybe more break even. I think people make mistakes in that regard. I think the biggest mistake is the one you've already mentioned. People don't really think about. We say this through our process of imagine your parent or your grandma is the user of this product. What would you want this to look like? How would it flow? And I still walk some PadSplits where somebody kind of messed that up and then created this weird hallway where you have to make this big L shape, and no one likes going down that L hallway. You know what I mean? It just like doesn't feel good. It's like dark, and then people churn. And so like I think it's like not really thinking through to the true experience is probably the biggest mistake people make. And they figure it out too late and they add that hallway, they don't have a light, and it's just people churn. People leave. People don't want to live in that long term. They might like tolerate it for a little bit of time, but it's not something, to your point around building for that user, that is going to have like lasting compounding effects. So that's probably the biggest mistake that people make. But we're trying to work better on like the community, where go talk to Dave, go talk to Brian, go talk to these other people, Macarena locally in Atlanta, go talk to these other people that have like done these projects, that understand some of these like learnings, to make less of those mistakes early on.
I love that. I think that when you're creating a space, you really need to pause. Like investors get very excited and they just like want to hit the ground running, and they'll buy material or they'll hire a designer or whatever it is, or just contractors, and the contractor will pick out the finishes and the selections and all of that. You really want to pause before designing, before buying anything, before demoing, putting up walls. You have to have a plan in place. You have to sharpen the axe for 4 hours.
Yeah, agreed. And we have advisors. I mean, that's how we've scaled, right? We hire an advisor locally in each market. They understand the market. They understand PadSplit, and they can help walk you through this. And so that's part of what we do to begin in that process, is understanding what people's real big goals are, to understand like what are the steps to get there. How do I look at this property, and what's the best learnings that we all have data wise as to like, well, what would you do with the layout of this particular property to avoid these mistakes that people have made? And so we're constantly trying to update those playbooks, but it's a plug for like what we do as a business is we are not yet a listing service similar, or marketplace similar to Airbnb, where you just list. You have to talk to people on our team to list, which is maybe a blocker for growth, but helpful from a quality standpoint, because we want people to be successful and we want people to know what's going on. And so you can't list a property without talking to somebody. But my ask is to like go talk to somebody, and they can help walk you through these. And my hope is that we can continue to work together and figure out what the right ROI playbook is for design and functionality, and like how do you keep layering these things on top and have this shared knowledge so people have the best outcomes on the marketplace.
I love that. If they have support, especially, like I always say, reverse engineer success, right? Follow the breadcrumbs of success. That will tell you what you should do moving forward. So if you have people that already know, just work with them. Even if you're a long-time investor, you still, maybe you haven't done it in this way before. So stop, pause, get the plan in place, and then hit the ground running.
Agreed.
Amazing. So in terms of scaling, if somebody comes in and they have a working model, do you have systems and support to be able to also help them scale? Do you see that investors often grow, like have like multiple types of these properties?
Yeah, I mean, that's our kind of group that we try to really go after, is like people that own, call it this 2 to 5 property group, has been really successful for us. Not that any other segment cannot be successful. That group does really, really well, where once you do one of these, you learn your kinks and you can start to add through. Like, yeah, people are a lot more successful. I think the blocker to that historically was financing. And when people have now built in financial products and feel comfortable underwriting PadSplit, because we've been around for now 6 years and have 70,000 people that have lived with us and have had good outcomes across all these markets, that there are lenders that will now lend on PadSplits. And so that was like an intentional focus, but that's how you can go scale, is capital to do so. And so part of it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, is like figuring out what people's goals are, figuring out how to like make this first property really successful so that you have good outcomes. And then there's the ecosystem around you, whether that's financing, whether that's general contractors, whether that's you helping with ROI, like whatever that is, you can help take that to the next PadSplit and be successful.
Amazing. I really am a big believer in repeatable systems. And traditionally, the design model is, reinvent the wheel every single time, or maybe just a little bit of systemization. But I think that the systemization needs to be probably like a 70-30 split, if not more, where you know exactly which appliances or, fixtures you're going to use, even if you change them out, that you can mix and match.
Totally. And we have our very basic kind of like spec sheet. But again, Dave Edwards has his own spec sheet. All these other hosts have their better design spec sheets, and they're getting better results because of it.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're building out for our investors as well. Like, have that system in your business so that every time you scale, you know exactly what worked, exactly what didn't work, and then you can scale that. If you were going to give your top 3 biggest takeaways from our conversation today, your advice for an investor just starting out with PadSplit, what would you recommend?
I mean, the first is go to PadSplit.com, go through our host page and like create an account. To do so, you'll start to get access to all of our information. The host advisors that we spoke about locally somebody will be reaching out to understand and like walk you through those next steps. I mean, that's really the big one. The other ones I'd say are like meet with as many operators as you can. I mentioned a few on these calls. We have a Facebook group where you can go ask all these particular questions, but just like getting into that ecosystem and understand what is like worked for hosts and not worked has been really, really helpful to like figuring out your own taste. And then maybe that's the last point I'll say is like your own taste. Like I was open to it clearly, like we've expanded through it. But initially I was skeptical, right? Of people like operating in their own way and like putting their own taste on it. And I'm just so encouraging of that now where it's like get started, meet with people, but then really focusing on like who you are as an operator and the experience that you want to provide. And I've yet to see anyone fail following that last step.
Amazing. Love it. If our audience wants to connect, they want to learn more about going in this direction, how can they do so?
So go to padsplit.com, go to the host section, create an account. Additionally, like my name is Adam. It's Adam@padsplit.com. I'm always happy to talk about this. One-on-one, relay you back to the community, whatever I can do to be helpful. I'm here to chat.
Amazing. Adam, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you about PadSplit, and I hope our audience finds it very, very insightful because I know I did.
Thank you so much for your time.